Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dreamdata.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dreamdata employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations,
social selling maybe. Hello and welcome everybody to a new Attributed session. I'm back, we're back after the summer. And it's time to get our marketing brains wired again. And to do that, I'm really happy to have Liam Moroney joining me today, because me and Liam frequently exchange conversations, opinions, etc. on LinkedIn. And now we get to talk in real life, Liam, which I really appreciate. And the reason why we're talking today, Liam, is that I don't know, maybe it's exaggerating, but you have really been pioneering or doing an extra round for brand awareness on LinkedIn in these very measurable days in marketing. And I really appreciate you kind of insisting that this matters, which helps all of us having to think a second time about what is this brand, how do we utilize it. One of my bigger questions today, how do we budget for it? How do we defend it when we speak to the guys in charge of the money and all these things? But Liam, if people are not following you like I am, could you maybe just give us the kind of what you've been up to the last couple of years and what led you to Storybook and what you do today?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm excited. It's always good to chat. So it's really good to be a guest on this. I'm a big fan of the series that you've been doing. For anyone who's not familiar, my name is Liam Moroney. I am the founder of a B2B brand marketing consultancy called Storybook. Before that, I spent about 15 years in my career in-house as a demand generation leader, marketing leader. I come from and have come through the B2B SaaS world. I was in everything from Series A to Series E. I was in ad tech, martech, legal tech, travel tech, fintech. If there was a tech in there, I probably had my job in there somewhere. And I'm very much came through like classic marketing. I went to college for marketing. I always wanted to be a marketer. That was my career path from when I was about 16 years old. And I think where it came full circle, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today, is that I, after spending a career in-house in B2B tech, saw a lot of the fundamentals not really being represented very well. And I think a lot of the growth at all costs world that we all came through, I think, in my opinion, distorted a lot of how we think marketing works and how we measure marketing, how we treat marketing, how we budget for marketing. So it became kind of a passion to try and be the evangelist for old school classic marketing fundamentals.
Super nice. Before we dive into the today's discussion, how did you know you wanted to kind of study marketing or get involved in marketing? I'm curious.
It's when I was in school. So actually, originally, before I wanted to be a marketer, I thought I wanted to be a photographer. That was a big thing. So I've been doing photography since I was like 14, 15 years old. And when I was in school, I got a job in a camera shop, which my mother would joke that I never made any money there. When they paid me, I would just put it right back into the register and buy something. So I just constantly used it as a way of buying toys. And while I was working there, I was in sales and we were selling camera equipment. And I didn't really realize it myself, but I was spending a lot more of my time thinking about, what we would put in the window display and label it this way, because like that would actually make it much more interesting. And I became very fascinated with how do we just present things correctly to an audience. And there was just a sales rep who was in there one day. He came in, he saw what I was doing. Was like, you should look into marketing. And then I looked it up, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, I love this. I found ads fascinating. I found all of that interesting. And once I realized what it was like, I could do that as a job. That's the most interesting thing in the world. So that's what led to it. And I went to college for it, and I always knew what I wanted to do.
The problem is with marketing is that it takes a while before your kids grow old enough to understand what you do for a living. The few times I've had my kid to my job, he thinks I just sit and stare at YouTube all day or something like that.
I still have that problem with my parents. I don't think they know what I do. I think they tell people I make ads, which I don't think has ever been true in my career. So, yeah.
That's great. Liam, how do we slowly warm up on this topic? Maybe just maybe you could just say a little bit about what you think a brand is or something like that.
This is such an interesting question, because I've spent so much time trying to think of this. And what's been really interesting is over the last couple of years, I've started to almost untangle myself from like the kind of emotional aspect of brand. I think we've kind of turned brand into this very ethereal, kind of mystical, intangible thing. And to some degree it is. But I think at the end of the day, like there's a pragmatic reason why brand exists. It is a way of being distinctively memorable. So when people see your company, they go, I know who that is. It is also a way of creating associations so that when they see you, they go, oh, you're the one who does X, or you're the more serious version of this versus the others. And I think a lot of what brand is doing at the end of the day is it's all an effort to be remembered by as many people as possible, to be distinctively remembered so that you separate yourself from the rest of the pack, and that you're easier to recall when people actually have a problem. And the other layer on it is it's also, especially in B2B, it's about de-risking things. People don't buy expensive things from people they don't know, and brand is a way of saying this is a thing that will work. This is, you can have confidence that it's going to do what it says, and it's worth the money that you're about to spend on it. Everything we're doing is largely in pursuit of those things. We use emotion to do that. We use storytelling, we use creative, but at the end of the day, all of it is at the end of the day a way of saying this is a brand you will remember and that you will have positive associations with, that makes it easier to spend money on something with confidence. More than anything, that's what it's about.
That's a lot of nice things to untangle there. I think one of the things I have also struggled with in the brand discussion is that fact, it has many arms and legs. What you just said there, like, is it just going wide so a lot of people sees your brand, or is it hitting the right people to see the brand, or is it like these very distinctive ads that you associate a specific word with a specific brand, which I think is also what makes the discussion muddy a bit sometimes, because people are not agreeing about what a brand is and what a brand is not.
Yeah. And this is one of those things that I think there's probably once a week I see a post on LinkedIn that has thousands of likes and it's saying something that's fundamentally incorrect. Like the common versions are things like, well, there's brand and branding, or branding versus, marketing. And you're like, it's all weirdly isolated. And Demandgen is, it's an entire separate conversation in and of itself. But I think like we've created false divisions and this sort of isolation of things. Like brand is a combination of things. The service you get from a company is and affects the brand. It's the real life experience of working with a company. Like there's brand associations that are totally outside of our control. And it's just people's lived experience with your company. It's the reputation you have that comes from how you treat people. It's whether or not you live up to the promise that you put out there. So like in a sense, brand is kind of this permeating thing that just goes throughout all of it. But some of it is intentional on our part. There are constraints that we can put in place. The strategy we can put into place like is the best of our ability to try and create a brand. But at the end of the day, a brand develops itself in a lot of ways too. Yeah. That's just outside of our control. If you go about the world under delivering and you're a dishonest company, there's no amount of brand strategy will make up for the fact that eventually people will go, well, yeah, but have you ever worked with them? Because that's not what they're like. You can't outrun reality. And I think a lot of it, and a lot of my point of view, is that most of marketing is realizing that we are not in control and that we cannot control the decisions people make. We cannot control the opinions they have about us. All we can do is do our best job at trying to increase the likelihood that they will say something and feel something positively about us.
Super good. And what if you then turn to kind of what are the misconceptions of what a brand is? I bet you observe a lot of those as well.
There's a number of them. And I think most of them are well-meaning. Like, I don't think there's a lot of malicious feeling about brand. I think the problem is that everyone kind of feels like they are a marketer. So a lot of what comes outside of marketing is other people bringing their opinions about brand in. And so like, everyone is part of brand and no one is part of brand. And it's very muddy in that sense. Yeah. I think the misconception is that, certainly in B2B, is that it's a luxury. It's the thing you do once you've got a really good business in place. And I think that's fundamentally backwards, because I think you can't grow yourself to being a really successful business without to some degree creating a brand out of all of that. And then eventually go, well, we're now going to invest in brand because we've hit 10 million ARR. It doesn't really work like that. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the bad sort of planning and processes around brand.
One of the things that can have over time sometimes annoyed me is that it's become kind of an apology for doing marketing that didn't work, where kind of it's just like this one size fits all. We ran a lot of these things. We did it for brand awareness, blah, 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 blah. I think that's also one of the things you're changing now, Liam, is that you are actually coming up with some leading indications whether your activities work or not. But I think to some, it's been an excuse of like just running a lot of silly things that weren't segmented enough, weren't targeted enough, weren't memorable enough. The creatives were too weak, but they blasted it out. They had a good fun. They went out drinking at the conference or whatever.
Yeah, so like that is a really good point. And one thing that's not the fault of marketers, I think, is that to non-marketers, marketing can look like a whole bunch of wasted money for fun and giggles. Because yeah, like ads are expensive. Creative is often weird and silly. We throw these big elaborate events and parties, and it looks frivolous to a lot of people. And I think one of the ways that we've tried to counteract that was where, certainly in B2B tech, has been things like demand generation. And for the record, most of my career, I was a demand generation person. That was the job title I had. I had demand gen teams. A lot of where I sort of like build my somewhat following on LinkedIn was through the lens of demand generation. And I fell victim to a lot of what I think we do in tech, certainly in SaaS, is that we try and make ourselves seem less like the arts and crafts marketing team. We use terms like revenue marketer, or you're a demand gen marketer, and like they're well-meaning, and I was very guilty of being one of those people who would describe myself as a revenue marketer, but I would use it in almost an insulting way to non-revenue marketers. Firstly, what is a non-revenue marketer? How can you be a marketer that's not contributing revenue? But the way I was framing it, and the way I think we still frame it a lot of the time, is saying, well, I focus on things that drive pipeline. If it doesn't drive pipeline and revenue, then it's not something I'm going to waste my time on. And I think that sounds great, but at the end of the day, it tends to skew towards performance marketing. It always does. And it starts to paint the kind of silly marketing as stuff that's not effective. But there's a reason we do silly marketing. There's a reason marketing is wildly creative, lots of storytelling. It's not because it's fun. Like, that's fine, but like eventually it would catch up. You can't just have fun for your job. It's because it's what is the most effective way of getting people to remember you.
Yeah.
You have to stand out. You're in a very noisy environment. People's memories are notoriously fickle and volatile. So you have to be visually interesting. You have to use things that create memories more effectively. Storytelling is a lot more effective at being remembered than facts. Visuals are a lot more memorable than words. So we use things that are designed to be remembered, and they just happen to be outlandish because turns out it's pretty hard to get people to remember who you are.
One of the things I really like about you, Liam, as well, is that you seem you've been quite taking the academic route, or at least the bookworm kind of route to this as well. You really also studied what, not just your gut feeling, but also what the marketing scientists out there are actually saying to be true on a larger scale.
And I think that's a lot of where my point of view has come from, where for a long time in tech, I think things just didn't feel like they lined up with what I remember learning in college. And then as I started to look around and explore outside of tech, like what is happening in the world of science for marketing? What is the newest developments? I suddenly realized that we were in no way connected to what the science was saying. A lot of what we were saying was actually quite counter to how the world actually works. And some of it just doesn't even intuitively feel like how the world works. Like for a long time, I was a real genuine believer that we could lead score our way towards getting people in the door, like a mechanical old school Marketo lead scoring.
Yeah.
But intuitively, it makes no sense. I don't buy that way. I don't think I've ever bought a piece of software because I read enough ebooks and opened enough emails to suddenly be
and you
ready.
move from mid funnel to low.
Yeah, like I don't buy that way. I don't know anyone who buys that way. And yet we've constructed this idea that that's how we're going to get our buyers to suddenly go through this process. And I think a lot of things like that just kind of don't feel like they even just connect with the way I understand the world works. And a lot of the marketing science out there makes a lot more sense to me. It's intuitively more correct. Like people will come in market to buy something when they choose to come in market, not because some marketer convinced them to.
Yeah.
And most of the decisions that we'll make about brands are, do I know who you are? Had I heard of you before I needed you? Who comes to mind most easily?
Yeah.
Those decisions make a big difference. And the biggest thing that has been, I think help frame it for me is that we think marketing is a deterministic endeavor. We think we can create outcomes by doing these things.
Mm.
But in reality, marketing is a probabilistic nature, which means we're just bettering the odds of it happening. I cannot make you think of my brand when you have a problem, but I can make it easier and more likely that you will.
Yeah.
That's as much as is in my control. And when you start to think of the world in probabilistic terms, it starts to make things feel a lot more interesting. Oh, we're doing this to be remembered. Brand awareness matters because being top of mind or near to mind is the
Mm.
best thing we can do. Like, it becomes a lot more strategic.
One of the things that has really helped, you can say, shape my thinking about brand has been this LinkedIn's quite simplistic 95-5 frame. Of course, it's super simplistic, but yet still, if you think about your target market out there are whatever percentage there is, whether it's 1 or it's 5 people that are like kind of actively out there looking for a solution for the problem. But most of the market, the 95s, are busy doing other things. They might be like a firmographic good fit for your company, but they have other projects. Maybe they're trying to save some cost. Maybe they just fired a lot of people. Maybe they're developing a new product. So the largest chunk of your addressable market out there is not buying your product right now. But we do this brand awareness so that once they feel that they have this problem that they need to solve, then it's really nice to be on that list that they start making of the vendors that they need talking with as they come in market. So that's one of the things, that components I like to think about, that we're doing brand awareness to make sure that once they flip the switch of more actively looking for something, we get in that conversation. I don't know how you think about that, Liam.
I would agree. And I know, like, you've talked to people, like John Dawes and things, who talk very, very intelligently, but it's far better than I would.
Yeah, also better than me.
But I think I often try and pull myself out of the kind of B2B world that we often fall into. Like, when I think about, what you call like academic or kind of like bookworm marketing, I think a lot of it is like, marketing is very similar across the board. The difference between B2B and B2C is not as clear as we make it out to be. There are differences, but I would argue that buying enterprise software has more in common with buying a car than buying a car has with buying a pair of jeans. It's not B2B and B2C. What is much more realistic is how complex is the purchase, how many people are involved in the decision to make that purchase, how frequently do you make that purchase. Like, a car is a good example of this. I think in terms of B2B often, that if we do a really, really good job, we can convince you to buy this product right now. And I think a lot of that is this bad internal thinking that we have in tech, certainly, because in SaaS, we often think like, we're releasing a product that's never existed. We're disrupting the world. Everybody's a potential customer and everyone needs this. Only I was able to prove that to you. And that's a very sales mentality. Whereas you just described it perfectly. People have projects. Everyone's going about their life with all these other distractions. They have budget that's available now, or it may not be available for 2 years. Like, everyone is in a different state of flux. And if you kind of pull it out and look at something that's more like B2C, there's nothing a marketer will do that will get me to buy a car any quicker than I am planning to buy a car. If I bought a car 6 months ago, there's no amount of, takedown campaigns you can say, well, Liam, your Volkswagen is terrible. You should go and buy it. It's like, no, that's just not how anything works. Whereas what's more realistic is, I know when I'm going to buy it, and it's when I can, and I am making a long-term plan. I am doing a lot of research well ahead of when I'm ready to. And then eventually when I do, the odds are most of my decision is probably already made up based on things I was thinking about long before I came in market to buy. And that's ultimately what brand is and what brand awareness is. Like you said, it's getting to be the brand that was one of the short list before they came in, because all of the buyer research would say about 80 or so percent of the time, they already knew who they were going to go with. And about 90% of the time, one of those vendors will be the one that they will go with. It's rare that people buy outside of their consideration set.
That's crazy. If we were to kind of let's maybe try to kind of create some pillars for people to kind of think about in their business as they're running it. What are kind of the like textbook things that you kind of, instead of, you need to take from being very fluffy to actually be some particular assets, some particular strategies that you need to get in place in order to actually create this brand that we're talking about?
Yeah. I think there's one of the things I think is probably the way we position brand is probably where I would actually try and start. Like I think, the very common question that I get asked or that we talk about on LinkedIn is how do you make the case for brand? And I think a lot of that, even just the way we phrase that statement, implies that brand is something that is additive. Well, we're already running a very successful program. Why would I want to add brand in? That feels expensive. That feels like it's uncertain, feels like it could be wasteful. And I think that's the wrong way to frame that. A better way that I would say to frame it is like, well, what are the major limiting factors in a company's ability to grow? It's how many people know you exist.
Yeah.
If nobody, that's the hard ceiling. If only 10,000 people know you exist, your entire window is 10,000 people who could possibly ever buy from you.
Yeah.
And going back to your 95-5 rule, statistically, that's a pretty low odds. If you've only got that many people who could potentially buy from you at any given time, there's 500 people who could ever purchase from you at any given time. Like the single limiting factor is the more people who know we exist, the better our odds are of being thought by those people when they eventually come in market to buy a product.
Yeah.
Brand awareness often gets treated as this trivial first step. I mean, even we use terms like first touch. I fundamentally disagree with that as a concept because it makes it seem like it's just a thing. Put an ad in front of them. Well, we've got our first touch. There we go. The job has been started. Brand awareness has been completed. Creating brand awareness is probably the hardest single step of all because most people ignore everything that isn't relevant to them until something convinces not to. And again, to use a non-B2B example, when you walk through a supermarket, like an American supermarket on average has about 20,000 items inside the store. Up to 100,000. Like it's colossal amounts.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, now the funny thing about it is a great book. Again, going back to like the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, Jenny Romanuk wrote a book called Distinctive Brand Assets, which talks a lot about this, where they've done consumer studies and they say, well, okay, so there's 100,000 items in a large American supermarket. How long does an average person spend in an aisle making decisions? And the answer is about 5 to 6 seconds. And that feels impossible to reconcile. How could you be able to do that? And the reason they do is because they ignore everything that is not familiar.
Yeah.
You go down the aisle, you look for the package that you recognize and you pick that up, and then that's the one you buy. That's how branding works. That's why branding works.
That's a good
People
example.
automatically go through the world ignoring virtually everything because your brain would burn out if you tried to consume all the ads that were ever served to you. So we ignore all the ads except for the ones that trigger something that goes, oh, I know this crowd. I'll give this a little bit more time. Breaking through that's very, very hard.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it. And I was out buying grass for my garden the other day. And that's also like, let me just go to the shop I know that sells these things. And then it wasn't even the particular brand. It was just, okay, I go to the shop I know deals with kind of garden stuff. And okay, they'll get my money in this situation. I'll trust whatever they say.
Yeah, you'll pick and that's like, that's a lot of what marketing is people choose the things that are familiar because familiar is safe. Like I remember when I first got to the US, and this was like 18, 19 years ago, I didn't realize how difficult it would be to go shopping in a supermarket when I didn't recognize so many of the brands. So I remember I was 23 years old. I had just got into American supermarket and I decided I was going to make pasta for dinner. That was what I was going to have. So I went down to where I knew the pasta aisle was and I said, I'm going to get a jar of pasta sauce. And I realized that none of the brands that I grew up with in Ireland were on the shelf there. So suddenly it was this almost like anxiety ridden event where it's like, I don't know who's good and who's not. And the only brand I recognized was Ragu sauce. And I went, well, I've heard of them, so I'm going to buy that one. Yeah. And then I brought it home and I was telling friends like a week later and I was, I bought Ragu. And they're like, why would you buy the bottom tier jar in America? And I was like, oh, is it? I had no idea. I didn't know what good was and what bad was. And it took me years to learn a lot of that. And like the things we take for granted, well, that's the top shelf one. That's the expensive one. If I want really good ice cream, I'm going to go with Ben & Jerry's or Romantica or Viennetta. But if I want the cheap stuff, we make decisions based on brands. They reduce the mental effort it takes to make what could be a decision that goes wrong.
I think that's also to me, there's some good arguments about doing that rebrand that you've always talked about. Because like if you start changing color, if you flush out all the memory that you actually have built up around a certain look and feel, or if you're, as a B2B company, constantly shifting categories, trying to tell something different to the audience every time, then I'm guessing you don't really create that memory, or you don't make that association between your company and this category of work that you do.
Yeah, and a lot of the current marketing theory would say that the most valuable thing you can do is stay consistent. And we know as marketers, we get bored of our ads long before anybody else does. But it goes even deeper than that. Like, changing your colors is effectively like wiping the memories of everyone who ever knew you. And there's really good cases of this. Like, there's famous rebrands that have gone wrong. Like, Gap changed their logo. It was massively unpopular and they changed it back within days. But there's a case where Tropicana, the orange juice company, I think I'm not sure they're in Europe, but then they're in the US anyway. Tropicana has had a famous kind of a shaped bottle, and that's part of their branding. The bottle had a distinctive shape. And so when people go through the store, they would pick it out. Well, one day they decided to not rebrand, but they changed the shape of their bottle to something that was kind of a more modern shape. They got bored of it and it looked kind of very trendy. They lost about $20 million in the first month of sales because people didn't recognize it. Even though the logo was there and the colors were there, the shape of the bottle, as it turns out, was why people were picking this up. So they were going through the supermarket effectively unable to find the product, so they just bought another one.
You really need to think twice about like changing these very distinct, or you call them distinct assets, right?
The theory, it's called distinctive brand assets. And it's not even that complicated. Like, the idea is that your logo is obviously a brand asset and everyone knows your logo. That's a big part of what we push. But outside of your logo, you have other things that are part of how people recognize your brand. Because what you want to do is you want to have elements that, even if your logo isn't there, there's something about it triggers, I know who that is anyway. Like, the blue from Dreamdata is a distinctive brand asset. The more commonly that gets used, you don't even necessarily have to have the logo. I know from the font style and I know from the colors, it's you. That's a distinctive brand asset. They go far beyond just colors. You've got audio is a very distinctive one, like the Netflix dun dun. That's a distinctive if you could be in the other room and you hear it and you know it's Netflix. And it goes beyond like product packaging. All of these things are distinctive. And what you're trying to do, according to the theory, is have a small repertoire of assets that you reinforce in everything that you do, so that when people see an ad, whether it's a brand ad or a performance ad, as long as it's carrying those assets, it's triggering an association to your brand.
If we change chapter a little bit, Liam, and look towards operationalizing this kind of, so we're at status quo today, and we need to go to this level instead in terms of brand awareness. I guess that's what you guys do at Storybook Marketing. Like, what is the kind of plan that you help your clients lay out to kind of go from one level of brand awareness to a different level of brand awareness?
I think, in my opinion, it's hard to make any case for increasing or working on brand if you don't know what your current state is. If you're not aware of how strong it is today and how valuable that is, or how much it's costing you to not have it be better than that, it's very hard to make any kind of a case. We do with Intermansion all the time. If you don't have a benchmark, then how can you know if you're improving? And I think a lot of people do not know exactly where they sit in the market. And, I think in a lot of cases we overestimate how good our brand awareness is. And that's to our detriment. I think a lot of if you don't have a way of quantifying it, it's very, very hard to make a case to do anything, because I've heard lots of cases about brand of we'll put it in the bucket that we don't measure. No, measure brand. You have to measure brand. Eventually someone's going to ask you to prove it in some way or form. And if you don't even have a starting point, then it's hard to make any case. And there's a lot of ways to get a starting point. Like, you can literally survey people and say, hey, have you heard of this brand? How many of them have? How many of them have not? But the version that I like, and the reason that I gravitate towards things like search data, is because it's very accessible. Survey data can be expensive and it can be slow, whereas there are things you can do that are very easy to start with. Like, branded search is a very simple proxy for how many people are actually making an effort to seek out your brand. How many people are Googling you? How many people are trying to find you? And how many are trying to find you and your competitors? And with basic search data, you can at least assemble one version of a story, which is our competitors are searching for them twice as much as they're searching for us. That's not good. Like, you would be surprised how effective it is when you show a chart to leadership saying, look at our competitors up here and look at us down here. Does that feel acceptable to you? And they're like, no, of course not. Because we all know branded search is a good quality traffic. It converts better, direct traffic. Like, that's what we want to be searching for us. And it's easier than I think we give it credit to just track that. You can go beyond that. You should go beyond that if you can get away with it and add more qualitative stuff, add more surveys. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to put a number to what is the current status of our brand and is it good enough?
I very much agree. And just like a sidetrack, I saw your post about the magic quadrants you just did. That was really fun. Like, what are they called? Forrester and Gartner, etc. Make these magic quadrants that everybody strives to get in. And I guess the C-levels will just celebrate it as a huge victory if they appear in that like leader category. But then you drill down and you see, oh, there's actually zero demand for our brand, even though we actually made that magic quadrant.
And this is the really important thing. Like, so brand awareness, one of the things that I try and talk about as often as I can is that brand awareness on its own doesn't necessarily mean you're going to drive any revenue for the business. It's not valuable unless it's the kind of brand awareness where people act on it. And this, I think, is where we oversimplify it. Like, brand awareness is a pretty broad spectrum. Like, at the very far end, there's basic logo recognition. If I show you a list of logos, how many of those do you recognize? That's aided brand awareness, where I'm providing you prompts going like, which of these looks familiar?
Yeah.
But it's a totally different level of awareness to go, tell me about this brand. What do they do? And then it's a completely different level of brand awareness to be recalled. Like, brand salience is a form of brand awareness, which is when you have a problem, do you think of us without needing to be prompted at all? And most people aren't that way. The reality is, like, that's a very, very hard thing to accomplish. And so a lot of brands are very familiar. Their brand awareness is high, but their consideration and the recall and the people acting on it are very, very low, which is kind of like when you talk to Byron Sharp, like, mental availability is the definition of that. It's how many people actually think of you when they have a problem. Like, you know, that's where I think the big difference is. Like, you take the quadrant example that I did the report on. ZoomInfo is in the leader quadrant of the ABM platforms. I would never think of ZoomInfo as an ABM platform. Zero times. If you gave me a list and asked me, name all the vendors to do ABM, I would never come up with them. But they're in the leader quadrant. And they're in the leader quadrant because they're massive. And they've got all this massive brand equity that probably gets some huge tons of business because some internal tech team's like, well, we already pay for ZoomInfo, so, you know, it's easier to just bolt on ABM than to buy it. But that's not the same thing. Like, that's brand awareness, but absolutely no brand recall when it comes to that category.
Yeah. Okay. So I completely agree, Liam, with the awareness level. I'll just share another story that the way we measured. I think I've shared it with you also. That, like, we have a defined list of let's say somewhat 15,000 accounts or something like that, and we're measuring how often do these accounts see us, and do we reach all of these accounts per month, per quarter, etc. So I think that's another layer people can do on top of the branded search, is to say, if we have a very selected list of accounts, can we measure somehow that these accounts gets to see us as well?
I think they're on two sides of the same thing. Like, on one hand, there's what do we do and how are we trying to increase the odds of it happening? And the best thing you can do is be able to say that, well, all these ad people have been served ads. We are continuing to serve them ads. If they're engaging with the ads, you've got at least another layer of quality onto that, saying, well, it wasn't just an impression. It was an impression that actually seemed to have been consumed to some degree. And, like, that's the inputs. That's all the work we're able to do to try and change it. The outputs are whether or not any of them remember any of the things that you put in front of them. And I think there's two ways of looking at it. There's, you know, when it comes to brand awareness, you can either ask people or you can watch what they do. And I think both are valuable. The problem with asking people is, there's a famous David Ogilvy quote, which is the problem with market research, is that people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. Just because people goes, I would definitely consider this product if you were to sell it to me. Sure, let's see what happens when we actually do that. So the other layer is, like, you can ask people, but you should also monitor whether or not they actually do the things that they said that they were going to do. And that's why I like things like branded search, because there's no reason someone Googles your brand unless it's in their head and they've got some level of curiosity about it. So like once you assemble all of it, you end up having the inputs. Here's all the stuff that we're doing. These people have been served ads. We're confident that the ads have reached them and they seem to be engaging with them. Then there's an output, which is, are they actually more aware of you than they were? And then there's an action element, which is, are they actually acting on that awareness when it seems to matter? That's relatively simplified, but that's it. That's the whole game.
Yeah. I really like to think about leading and lacking metrics. And like step one is try showing them some ads to do whatever activity. Step two, are they actually starting to search for you? Step three, are they starting to book demos? Step four, do they enter the sales pipeline? Step five, do they actually sign a contract? So I think it's really good to set up this kind of, hate to say it, funnel metrics for your B2B marketing, that if we press more in one of these activities, does it then kind of the waterfall continue?
Yeah. And the one difference I think is that it's a valuable, let's call it a funnel if you like go down that path. As long as you realize that getting awareness and creating awareness is the objective. It's not the first step and now we need to convert them. Like that happens independently. The goal is to get as many people as you possibly can who are ideal fit customers for you to know who you are, and then to maintain that indefinitely. Yeah. That's the goal, because essentially brand awareness is the conditions you're creating that set all of your demand gen and performance stuff up for success. The more people who know you and the longer you continue to maintain those memories, the more likely that when people come in market, they're going to think of you or they're going to respond to your demand gen efforts better. It's conditions. You're just setting up the conditions for success.
If we go back to the, like, we need to know where we are today, and that I completely buy. Then what are the operations, what are the tangible things that you help your clients then go do as they try to go from point A to point B in brand awareness?
I think what's been really interesting to me is that when you start to think about brand awareness as a goal to accomplish, like I want to increase the amount of awareness in the market, it starts to open up the door very differently to the kinds of marketing that you would do to accomplish that. Because I think we think in terms of hyper measurable, hyper conversion type things. Everything should be clickable, it should be attributable, it should have a UTM attached to it. But if you're thinking about how do I create the most reach, you would look at channels that you would never look at through a demand gen lens. Like billboards, out of home, I mean, hell, like the Times Square ads that you've put up, like that is the least attributable form of marketing that you could have. However, from a reach point of view, as long as the right audience sees it, it's a very, very low cost, high reach channel. CTV is very high reach. Direct mail is extremely potent at creating strong brand awareness with people because it's a memory that lasts when you physically touch something. But there's often like things that we would never consider. Print could be very effective in the right hands. PR is extremely effective. Like the goal is, once you start to realize that it's not a step towards conversion, it's a goal in and of itself. The goal of brand awareness and the goal of brand marketing is to reach the largest proportion of people you possibly can and create as much awareness and durable memories in as many people as you can connected to the category. And very, very targeted ads don't accomplish that.
Yeah, no, completely. I completely agree. Let's just double down on. So we when we talk, we assume we don't say all the people in the world. We're still not trying to kind of boil the ocean here. It's about what is it that Byron Sharp calls it? Like, is it category buyers? That is the right term?
Category, like you only want people who really conceivably could buy your product. Like otherwise, there's no real value, or at least there's very, very significantly lower value in that.
Yeah. So as you select the venues you go down for raising awareness, then like do remember that it's not everybody in the world who can buy your product. So like you have to kind of select activities that are somewhat hitting the atmosphere of your category buyers.
Sure. Like a Super Bowl ad is probably not advised for any B2B tech company because it's just so much more reach, unless you like, there's a point at which brand fame is very valuable, but you're already at a certain level of success before that tends to be something you need to worry too much about.
I think I've seen multiple Gary Vaynerchuk videos where he says that it's still one of the most undervalued assets out there.
You know, like when you talk about like the category buyers, one thing that I think we do often get wrong is that when it comes to B2B specifically, it's better known, like if you over target and you only serve ads to the people who are going to be the champions in your sales process or the executive buyers, you end up missing all of the other people. Where brand fame is valuable because if you come into a conversation and the CFO has heard of the product that you're pitching, that's going to be your benefit. So like there is actually a good argument that building your brand awareness outside of a very exact group of people can also be valuable. There's a point at which it's totally irrelevant. You don't need, 10-year-olds to know who your brand is, but it's going to be valuable for other members of an organization to know. So like there's a point of diminishing returns with very targeted advertising. And I think we get way too specific with this, where when you talk about like ideal fit, we often index not just towards this is firmographically and demographically the right kind of person. They also have intense signals that show that they're in market to buy. If you get down to that level, you're ignoring the vast majority of your future buyers.
Yeah, I think we put out some benchmarks this year where the buying committee on the closed won deals of our customers were like something like 7 people. And they're not all marketers. Maybe it's the CEO who's signing the contract or the CFO, as you just said. So be careful about be specific, but not too narrow about how your marketing hits. But Liam, the unavoidable question. So you just mentioned the CFO, and I think all of us who love to do marketing, we would also love to be able to give a good rational explanation to the CFO of kind of how much budget do we allocate and what are the things you'll get in return if you give me this budget. And I know we've had this question a million times, so I'm just really curious to hear it again. What's the current pitch for brand awareness?
I think I've yet to find a good argument where it doesn't work to try and reframe the conversation through genuine training about what marketing is and how marketing works. Because I think if you follow the argument like, hey, we've spent X amount on performance marketing, we get this much return, like, will I get the same return or more if I invest in brand? That's typically how the argument comes up, but it's also not correct because you're assuming that one is in competition with the other, and they are not. It is not brand versus demand. It never ever has been. They're both part of this very complex, interdependent series of tactics. Like to me, I think the arguments that I've found these to be far more valuable than I think a lot of people appreciate. I think we have this belief that CFOs and finance people are these really rigid, difficult people to work with. They're really not. They want to invest in marketing. Good finance people will tell you, tell me how I can help set this up. I just need to know with some confidence that there's a strategy behind how you're going to do it. And I think when you position it in terms of, if we only invest in performance marketing, there is a hard upper limit on how much we can grow with it. We will plateau because we have reached the maximum amount of people who possibly know us. Or worse than that, you're only targeting the people who may actually buy from a brand that they've never heard of. You're basically trying to live in this tiny pocket. And brand awareness is the leverage that gets you out of that. It is far more valuable to be able to target people in a much broader pool of people. And so like the reason to invest in brand is not this additive value. It's not, well, we'll be great if we only invest in performance marketing. Brand will like put a cherry on top. No, brand is the sort of, it's almost how you get out of the small fish pond into the bigger one. Because once you get on a consideration set, once you're an established category typical buyer that finds its way onto everyone's RFP, we are in a different order of success altogether. Otherwise, it's why small brands stay small.
I have a good answer. I was also like, as you were talking, Liam, I was also like picturing a buyer journey in my head. And like, if you only advertise once the kind of in-market behavior is displayed, it's like being like 90 days late to the party because the others have been making their arguments for 90 days. And now you come last minute and say, hey, you should also talk to us.
And even longer than that, like the 6 Sense buyer research tells a very, very bleak picture if you're not investing in brand. And, like the picture basically goes, when people come in market, there is about 80% of the time where they already know who they were going to go with. And most of the time, those people will pick one of those brands. So there is an argument that there's sort of 20% of the time where people are open to a brand they've never heard of. That's generally where people who are hyper-performance marketing focused tend to win. You're getting in with people who are very price sensitive and you discount yourself and you show up and you're like, hey, we'll give you like a free trial and we'll throw in all this stuff. Yeah, you can definitely win, but if you're only ever limited to this sort of 10 to 20% of the market who are willing to go for someone who showed up 10 minutes before they were about to pay for something and offered something better, like, okay, like there's a limit to how big you can realistically get. What you want to do is win in that other big pocket where most of the time they're already familiar with the brands. They've been familiar with the brand for a long time. Like, in fact, a lot of the buyer research in the B2B stuff is quite bleak. Kerry Cunningham talks about this all the time, where they find that in a lot of the B2B buying, people who are buying have bought from the category multiple times before. Most of them are not brand new, immature, like, unaware buyers. They've already bought 2 or 3 times in their career. Like, they're going to buy from brands they know. They're not going to buy from brands they've never heard of. So brand awareness, it's the ticket to the party. Like, the funny thing is, almost every CEO in tech appreciates that being in the quadrant is a cost of doing business. You just have to. They don't like spending the money on Gartner or on Forrester. Nobody enjoys spending that. It's quite exorbitant. It feels a little bit like a shakedown at times. But you have to do it, because if you're not in there, then you're going to basically get kicked out. You won't make it through the procurement trap of a big upmarket company if you're not in the quadrant. It's like the ticket. So it's the same thing. Brand awareness is no different. If you're not in the list, you're only ever going to have an outside chance in the people who are willing to take a bet on an unknown brand. It's not a lot of people.
I really like what you're saying, Liam, about, I think it's us as marketers, fair enough if the rest of the organization don't get marketing when you start, but it's your responsibility to, as long as you're there, try to educate them why are we doing the things we do. It's your responsibility to kind of raise them up and have realistic expectations on when are we going to see kind of value from this. Like, just to put a benchmark in there, we, like, our latest customer journey benchmark said 211 days from first touch to a deal won. It's probably most likely longer than that. So that if you switch on an ABM campaign today, it's not like it's going to rain demo calls tomorrow. It's going to take time for these people to get acquainted with your brand, see it 2, 3, 4 times, start to recognize what you do, start to associate the pains and the solutions that you have available. So do speak proactively with the decision makers in your organization if you expect them to give you money to spend.
Yeah. And I think, your point about it being our job to educate on marketing, I fundamentally agree with this. And I think a really good example, I heard a really good speech one time. It was from Colin Fleming, who is now at, I believe, ServiceNow. He was the SVP marketing at Salesforce. And he was at Salesforce when they brought in the mascots that Salesforce uses. Like, they have, Astro, and they've got like the Einstein, all those like cutesy characters that are all part of the Salesforce. If you ever go to Dreamforce. And that whole thing came about because Salesforce was working with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And Salesforce, despite the fact that this seems unlikely, acknowledged they had a brand awareness problem. Colin Fleming said this directly himself. We had a brand awareness problem. Everyone knew who Salesforce was, but they were not thinking of us in the specific scenarios that we wanted them to. So even Salesforce had a brand awareness problem. And when working with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, one of the things that came out of the work was distinctive brand assets. And they said, you should have a character. A mascot is a very, very good distinctive brand asset. It's got a face. People remember faces more. Colin said at an event I went to that he was nearly laughed out of the room when he explained that to the sales team. And they also like, this is like a terrible idea. Why? Like, we're a serious enterprise company and you're giving us these cutesy looking characters. Turned out to be the right thing. It was a very, very effective strategy. But even him, at a very big company like Salesforce, backed by the Ehrenberg Bass, had to explain there's a reason behind what feels silly to you, because marketing often looks silly in practice because there are things that you're doing behind the scenes that make that the best way to do it.
We have a question here, Liam, just before the end from Alyssa. Is there a recommendation you have about measuring mind share as it relates to consideration lists or shortlist? I understand brand search is a good proxy for awareness, but how else can you benchmark your company and your brand efforts?
The simplest answer is there's no way to find out what's going on inside of people's heads for asking them directly. And I think that's where survey-based data does have a value. Like, I think I like brand search as a good starting point because you can at least say this percentage of the audience is thinking of us to some degree. Now, what you don't know is what kind of people those are, whether or not they're enterprise buyers or the mid-market buyers. You don't know whether or not you fall number 2 on the list or number 3 or at all on the list. And sometimes it's just good to straight up ask a representative group of people, how many people would you like choose if you were building, like, who's your consideration set? Where do you rank them? Who do you think stronger at this? Who do you think stronger at that? And that really, like, there's no other way of doing that bar asking people. I think surveys are difficult and they can be expensive, but I think it's one of those things that they don't change that often. Like, the truth is, you could do a survey now and it's probably going to be valid for the next 6 to 12 months. So doing it once and getting the investment, it's a benchmark. And, you know, there's crowds out there like Winter who are very B2B specific. They do a very good job at constructing really well-defined lists like this. And then you can support that with stuff like brand search over time to see, are you increasing the amount of people who are searching for you? But there's no way to get inside people's heads without asking them to reveal what's in their head. But you do have to ask them the right way and the right kinds of questions, which goes back to that Ogilvy quote that if you don't know how people will say the thing they want you to hear, you got to frame the questions right.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming up to the end, Liam. If you think about the next like 12 months, what are the developments you're hoping to see for the B2B brand marketers, or not B2B marketers out there, as they kind of work with their brand? What are the kind of exciting things? What are the things you hope to see change?
I think, I mean, on one hand, there is a moment for brand happening right now, which is very nice, because a couple of years ago, I was banging my head off a wall on LinkedIn saying stuff that like everyone was disagreeing with me on. So it's nice to be part of the majority for once, I think. And I think AI is making that a reality. You need to be distinctive. You need to have a moat. Brand happens to be that thing. I think what I'd like to see, and I do think it's happening, is that we're realizing that B2B tech is not this very, very unique category whose marketing operates completely different to the rest of the world. In reality, we share a lot more in common than we have differences. There's always differences in industries. There's always differences with different types of buyers and what motivates them. But the same brains make the same decisions and people react in the same way. It's no different to buying a house, buying a mortgage, getting a car. There is fear involved. There is risk involved. There are multiple people who have to have all of their needs met. The more you understand people, the more you start to realize that people act the same way in a lot of different ways. And marketing, a lot of the old rules of marketing are exactly as applicable today in an AI world, in an intense signal world. Like it's people, the brains are thousands of years old, millions of years old. They're not changing anytime soon with the way that we make decisions.
Liam, we almost got through an hour's marketing conversation without saying AI, and now you blew it. No, but I completely agree, and I also, like, on top of that, I want to sprinkle, like, even PR nowadays will have a bigger role again, because how do LLMs associate your brand with something?
Yeah, what's old is new again.
Product category, and then they look for brands that do these things. And the broader you reach out with that PR, the easier for the LLM it will be to associate you with your digital reputation.
100%.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time, Liam. It's been a big joy again. If people have listened to your Irish dialect and loved what they've heard, what path should they take to continue following you?
I am chronically online on LinkedIn, so I'm always around for any conversations there. So please join me in anything. It's always nice to connect with people on there. Yeah, I think that's where I spend a good amount of my time, for sure. If there's anything from a brand tracking, brand measurement point of view, I would love to connect with anyone interested in that, but just happy to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and let's plug the website. Where do you find your brand measurement tool?
Yeah, storybookmarketing.io. Reach out and we can all set up time to talk.
Yeah, I've looked at it and it looks really, really cool. So definitely recommend that.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. And everybody, thank you so much for your time listening into us.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.